On July 12, 2026, a fire ignited in a remote corner of Wabakimi Provincial Park in northern Ontario. It was 100 hectares, a single fire in a remote location. 4 days later, that fire had consumed 350,922 hectares of Canadian boreal forest. 4 days, 100 hectares to 350,000. And as of today, the 17th of July, 2026, it is still burning. It is still not under control. There is no containment timeline, and the forecast for the coming days says the conditions that built this fire are not going anywhere. A community in northwestern Ontario has been largely destroyed. Collins First Nation, also known as Namaye-Gusisagagon, a community whose roots in that land go back generations, has been burned. The representative for that region at Queen's Park confirmed that the majority of the community is gone. Homes gone, buildings gone. The physical infrastructure that community depended on for daily life is gone. 15 communities across northwestern Ontario are under mandatory evacuation orders right now. 80 of the more than 190 active wildfires currently burning across the province are completely out of control. A CN rail freight train was surrounded by a wall of flames on a track near Armstrong, and the crew had to be evacuated while the fire moved in on both sides. 2 days ago, Toronto recorded the worst air quality of any major city on the planet. And the extended forecast from the Ministry of Natural Resources says, in their direct words, that hot, dry, and windy conditions are expected to persist throughout the region for the coming days. This is not a Northern Ontario story. This is one of the most serious wildfire emergencies this province has seen in decades. And today we are going to break down exactly what is happening, how it got to this point, what it means for everyone from Wabakimi to Toronto to New York State, and what is coming next. No filler. No speculation. Every number I give you is sourced from official provincial updates, federal data, and documented reporting. Let us get into it. Drop a comment right now. Have you or your family been affected by the smoke, the evacuations, or the road closures across northwestern Ontario? Are you watching this from one of the communities under an evacuation order right now? Tell me where you are. Thousands of people are watching this from across Ontario and the northeastern United States, and every first-hand account helps build the complete picture of what this emergency actually looks like on the ground. Subscribe and turn notifications on because this situation is changing daily. There will be updates tomorrow and the day after, and every day until this is under control. You want to know the moment things shift, and you want to know it before conditions deteriorate further in your area. Let us go. To understand how a single fire that was 100 hectares on July 12th became 350,000 hectares by July 16th, you need to understand two things: how wildfire in the boreal forest behaves when the conditions align against it, and what those conditions looked like across northwestern Ontario over the past 2 weeks. The boreal forest that covers northwestern Ontario is one of the most fire-adapted ecosystems on Earth. These forests have been shaped by fire for thousands of years. The trees, the soil, the animal populations, the entire ecological structure of the Canadian boreal reflects a long coexistence with wildfire. Under normal conditions, fires burn through and the forest regenerates. That relationship between fire and forest is ancient and, in its natural rhythm, healthy. What is not normal is the speed, the scale, and the confluence of conditions that allowed Thunder Bay 36 to go from 100 hectares to 350,000 hectares in 96 hours. 3 factors converged to turn a manageable fire into something uncontrollable: fuel, heat, and wind. The fuel in northwestern Ontario right now is exceptional. Months of below-average precipitation have desiccated the forest floor. The organic layer of needles, moss, and decomposed wood that normally holds moisture is dry to a degree that allows fire to move through it at extraordinary speed. Trees that would normally resist ignition because of their moisture content are under severe drought stress. Deadwood and standing dead trees, what firefighters call snags, are abundant and bone dry. The fuel load across large areas of northwestern Ontario is not just adequate to sustain fire. It is primed to accelerate it. Armstrong, Ontario recorded a temperature of 40.7 degrees Celsius on Monday, July 14th. To put that number in context, it is a new all-time temperature record for the community. Not a record for mid-July, not a record for the summer, the hottest temperature ever recorded there in any month of any year. And it is the hottest temperature recorded anywhere in the province of Ontario since the catastrophic heat wave of 1936, 90 years. That extreme heat does 2 things simultaneously that matter enormously for fire behavior. It accelerates the evaporation of any remaining moisture in the fuel, driving fire danger higher with each passing hour. And it creates powerful convective instability in the atmosphere directly above an active fire. When a large fire burns under conditions that hot, the superheated air rising from the fire creates its own weather. Pyroconvective columns, columns of smoke and superheated gas rising tens of thousands of feet into the atmosphere, can generate their own wind patterns, carry burning embers kilometers ahead of the main fire front, and start new ignitions far beyond the perimeter that crews are working to establish. Under extreme heat, a large fire does not wait for the wind to move. It generates its own, then add the actual wind. Hot, dry, and windy conditions across northwestern Ontario are not a coincidence. They are the product of the same atmospheric ridge pattern that has been producing record heat across Western Canada and the northern interior. Wind does to wildfire what oxygen does to any combustion. It dries the fuel ahead of the fire, it drives the flame front forward faster than crews can respond, and it pushes burning material airborne, spreading ignition points across a landscape faster than any ground crew can track. When you combine record-breaking heat, critically dry fuel, and sustained wind across a landscape of remote boreal forest with limited road access, you have the conditions that produce 350,000 hectares of active fire in 4 days. Thunder Bay 36 is officially designated THU 036. It started on July 12th, approximately 14 kilometers northeast of Wabakimi Lake, west of the Berg River, well inside the remote interior of Wabakimi Provincial Park. In those first hours, it was one fire in one place. What happened over the following 4 days was not a single fire growing. It was a fire that grew while also absorbing other fires around it. Thunder Bay 36 merged with Dryden 13. It absorbed several additional Thunder Bay designated fires. By the time the Ontario Forest Fire Account issued their July 16th update, what had been multiple separate fire events were now one single complex measuring 350,922 hectares. Nearly twice the total land area of the city of Toronto, a single fire complex, still not under control. No containment timeline established. Crews are focused on establishing a fire perimeter, but when you're dealing with a fire of this size and terrain, this remote perimeter establishment itself is a multi-week operation under the best conditions. And conditions right now are not the best. To understand what not under control actually means, think about what wildfire crews are doing and not doing in a situation like this. When a fire is listed as not under control, it means crews have not established a continuous perimeter around the fire. There are no lines, no fire breaks, no cleared corridors that reliably prevent the fire from expanding in any given direction. Crews may be working aggressively on specific sections, protecting specific communities or transportation corridors, but the fire as a whole is expanding on its own terms. Under control means a perimeter exists. Being held means the perimeter is being maintained, but the situation is fragile. Not under control means the fire is making its own decisions about where to go next. 80 of Ontario's active fires right now are in that third category. 80 fires that are, at this moment, expanding on their own terms. Thunder Bay 36 is the defining fire of this season, but it is not the only major fire complex burning across the Northwest. Fort Frances 14, officially 44014, is currently sitting at 55,106 hectares, also not under control. And Fort Frances 14 carries a specific danger that extends beyond the fire itself and into the supply and transportation infrastructure of the entire region. The northern perimeter of that fire is estimated to be approximately 5 kilometers southwest of the Trans-Canada Highway, at its closest point. 5 kilometers. The southern perimeter extends to approximately 6 kilometers north of Highway 11. The Trans-Canada Highway is not a convenience in northwestern Ontario the way it might be in more densely routed southern parts of the country. It is a lifeline. It connects communities to supply chains, to medical services, to each other. A fire 5 kilometers from the Trans-Canada is a fire that is actively threatening one of the only roads that matters across that entire geography. Fort Frances 15, designated 4015, is 48,216 hectares. Also not under control, burning across the Quetico Provincial Park region and the Atikokan area. Quetico is one of the most ecologically significant wilderness areas in Ontario, a park system that canoeists and wilderness travelers come from across North America to experience. Parts of it are burning right now. And then there is a development that adds a genuinely new dimension to this emergency. A wildfire that started across the border in Minnesota, known as the Thumb Fire, has crossed the international boundary into Ontario. It has merged with Fort Frances 39 on the Canadian side of the border and is now threatening the Gakijiwanong Anishinaabe Nation, also known as Lac La Croix First Nation. This is a cross-border fire event. A fire that began in one country has become an active threat to an indigenous community in another country. That is not a situation with a straightforward jurisdictional response. It is one of the reasons authorities have issued an evacuation alert for the entire Lac La Croix area. Wildfires do not observe international borders. They follow fuel and wind and heat. The boundary between Minnesota and Ontario is a human construct that matters nothing to a fire moving at the speed this one has been moving. The human impact of this emergency is most concentrated, most severe, and most irreversible in the First Nations communities of northwestern Ontario. Collins. First Nation Namegusis Sagagon has been largely destroyed. Not damaged, not threatened, largely destroyed. The community representative at Queen's Park confirmed that the majority of the community has burned. There are no reported fatalities, and that outcome is the result of the evacuation orders being issued and executed in time. But the absence of death does not mean the absence of catastrophe. The homes are gone. The community buildings are gone. The physical infrastructure of a community that was built over generations on land that has been home to that community for far longer than the province of Ontario has existed is gone. Rebuilding will take years. Returning to that land in any recognizable form will take years. The disruption to lives, to families, to connections, to traditional territory and practices is not something that resolves when the fire is extinguished. At least 15 communities across northwestern Ontario are currently under mandatory evacuation orders. The communities confirmed under those orders by Ontario Provincial Police include Armstrong, White Sand First Nation, Collins, Lac des Mille, Lacs First Nation, Gakijiwanong Anishinaabe Nation, and Gull Bay First Nation. For most evacuees, the immediate destination has been Thunder Bay, but Thunder Bay's accommodation capacity has been overwhelmed. Authorities have had to begin moving people further south, in some cases all the way to Toronto, hundreds of kilometers from home. And for remote First Nations communities in the Boreal, an evacuation is not what the word conjures. In the minds of people who live in places with roads and airports and transit systems, an evacuation from a fly-in community requires aircraft. It requires buses staged at the end of whatever road access exists. It requires coordinating the movement of entire populations, including elders, children, people with medical needs, pets, livestock, with extremely limited infrastructure and extremely limited time. It interrupts healthcare access in communities that already face significant barriers to health services under normal conditions. It disrupts education. It severs connection to traditional lands and practices that are not simply cultural activities, but are fundamental to the health and well-being of those communities. Chiefs of Ontario have issued a formal public call for immediate, coordinated emergency support from both the provincial and federal governments. That call deserves to be heard clearly and answered with the urgency it reflects. Beyond the mandatory evacuation orders, evacuation alerts are also in effect across a wider area, and the distinction matters. A mandatory evacuation order means leave now. An evacuation alert means be ready to leave immediately, on very short notice, when the order comes. The alert zone currently covers townships including Hutchison, Ramsay Wright, Crooked Lake, and Weaver in the Dryden, Fort Francis, and Atikokan District. It covers dozens of lakes and road access areas, including Boot Lake Road, Camp 111 Road, Crystal Lake, and Magnetic Lake, among many others. A separate alert covers the Lac La Croix area directly tied to the cross-border Thumb Fire. If you are in any of those areas, the time to prepare your emergency bag is not when the order comes. It is now. Medications, identification documents, passports, important legal and financial papers, a change of clothing. Enough for several days. Your emergency bag exists so that when the order comes, you are walking out the door in minutes, not scrambling to remember what matters. The transportation disruption across northwestern Ontario is compounding the humanitarian challenge of this emergency in ways that Southern Canadians and international observers may not fully appreciate. Highway 527 is closed in both directions between Gold Bay and Armstrong. Highway 599 is closed between Highway 516 and Pickle Lake. A full emergency area order came into effect at 12:01 in the morning on July 17th for the Fort Francis 14 zone under Emergency Area Order 2026-09. All travel and land use within that designated area is prohibited unless you hold a specific permit from the Ministry of Natural Resources. That zone encompasses more than 20 named roads and 25 named lakes and waterways, all restricted, all closed to general access. Northwestern Ontario does not have redundant transportation infrastructure. The road network across the northwest is thin. Closing one major highway in this region does not produce an inconvenient detour of a few extra minutes the way a highway closure in southern Ontario might. It produces detours of hundreds of kilometers. In some cases, it temporarily cuts off a community entirely, meaning supplies cannot come in and residents cannot move out along the normal route. The fragility of the transportation network in this region is not a new problem, but it becomes acutely dangerous when fire closures eliminate the already limited options. The CN Rail incident near Armstrong deserves specific attention because it illustrates the speed and aggression of this fire in a way that is difficult to convey with hectare counts alone. On the evening of July 13th, a CN Rail freight train was sitting on a siding near Armstrong, Ontario. It was there for a routine reason, waiting for an oncoming train to pass before it could continue. Standard railway procedure. While it was stationary, the wildfire moved in, not slowly, quickly enough that by the time the situation was fully apparent, the tree line on both sides of the tracks was fully engulfed in flames. The crew was surrounded. Ontario MPP Sol Mamakwa shared video from inside the locomotive cab showing what the crew was seeing, flames on both sides of the tracks with no clear route of retreat. CN Rail confirmed the crew was evacuated safely. At least one crew member was treated for smoke inhalation, according to the Teamsters Union. CN Rail has since suspended all freight operations in the area and says it is investigating the circumstances that led to a train crew being placed in that position. The Teamsters Canada Rail Conference was direct in their public statement about what happened. Their words were these: "No shipment is worth a human life." That statement reflects a real tension that emergency situations create between the pressure to keep supply chains moving and the point at which that pressure crosses into unacceptable risk for workers. Freight rail is critical infrastructure for northwestern Ontario. When it stops running, the supply chain implications are real. But the alternative, continuing to operate trains through active fire zones, produced an outcome where a crew was surrounded by fire on an active track. The investigation will need to determine how that decision was made and what safeguards need to exist going forward. Aviation over the Fort Francis 14 area is currently restricted by a NOTAM, a Notice to Air Missions. Non-suppression aircraft, meaning any aircraft not directly involved in firefighting operations, cannot operate in that airspace. But there is a deeper problem that the NOTAM reflects. Heavy smoke is actively limiting the effectiveness of aerial firefighting operations across the region. Water bombers and helicopters are the most visible symbol of a wildfire response. They are the images that appear in news coverage: scooper planes banking low over lakes, filling their tanks, dropping water or retardant on the fire front. But aerial operations depend on visibility. Smoke that is thick enough to prompt air quality warnings in Toronto is smoke that is actively reducing the ability of pilots to see the terrain they are working over, to make accurate drops, to safely navigate in the fast-changing conditions near an active fire front. The smoke that is making people in Toronto sick is the same smoke that is hampering the firefighters who are trying to contain the fire that is producing it. Several hundred wildland firefighters are currently deployed across northwestern Ontario, supported by nearly 50 aircraft, including water bombers and helicopters. The federal government has deployed an additional 3 firefighting helicopters to the region. These are professional crews doing extraordinarily difficult work in conditions that are actively working against them. But the scale of what they are facing needs to be understood plainly. 350,000 hectares. That is the area of the fire complex they are working on. The total land area of the city of Toronto is approximately 63,000 hectares. Thunder Bay 36 alone is more than 5.5 times the size of Toronto. The firefighting resources, while significant, are deployed against a fire that has already grown beyond any possibility of direct attack along its full perimeter. The strategy at this point is not to put the fire out. It is to protect what can be protected, to keep evacuated communities evacuated, and to wait for weather conditions that allow the fire to become less aggressive. The air quality story from this emergency extends far beyond the fire zone itself, and it is affecting millions of people who have never seen these fires and never will. On July 15th, smoke from the northwestern Ontario fires moved south in a concentrated way. The skies above Ottawa and Toronto turned a yellow-gray color. According to ICARE, the Swiss air quality monitoring platform that tracks real-time pollution levels in cities around the world, Toronto was recorded as having the worst air quality of any major city on the planet on that day. Not in Canada, on the planet. Environment Canada issued an orange-level air quality warning for Toronto, and the language in that warning matters. Orange level means the health risk extends to everyone, not just people with respiratory conditions, not just the elderly. Everyone's health is at risk during heavy smoke conditions, regardless of age and regardless of health status. The fine particulate matter in wildfire smoke, what scientists designate PM2. 5, because the particles measure 2.5 micrometers or smaller, penetrates deep into lung tissue in ways that larger particles cannot. At sufficient concentration, it triggers cardiovascular stress, respiratory inflammation, and can exacerbate underlying conditions from asthma to heart disease. When a major international monitoring platform logs Toronto as the most polluted major city on Earth on a given day, that is not a local story. The smoke has also crossed the international border into the northeastern United States. New York State issued health advisories specifically in response to the Ontario wildfire smoke, with authorities describing the potential for a significant smoke event across the region. Millions of people across southern Canada and the northeastern United States have been under some form of smoke or heat advisory this week as a direct result of fires burning hundreds of kilometers away in the boreal forest of northwestern Ontario. The temperature context compounds everything. Northwestern Ontario has seen historically extreme readings this week alongside the fires. Armstrong's 40.7 degrees Celsius reading on July 14th was not just a local record. The ministry noted that it was the hottest temperature recorded in Ontario since the heat wave of 1936. That reference point is sobering. The summer of 1936 was one of the most severe heat events in North American meteorological history, a period of extreme drought and temperatures that killed thousands of people across the continent. Reaching temperatures comparable to that benchmark in 2026 reflects how extreme the atmospheric conditions have been across this region. In Toronto, Tuesday was the city's hottest day in approximately 15 years. By Wednesday, Toronto had recorded 30 degrees Celsius or higher on 13 separate days this year. The typical count by mid-July is approximately 7. The city of Thunder Bay responded by shutting down all outdoor pools, all beaches, all splash pads, both municipal golf courses, and all outdoor marina services. That is not a normal operational decision. That is a city responding to conditions that make outdoor exposure dangerous. The extended forecast provides no meaningful relief. The Ministry of Natural Resources and their Aviation, Forest, Fire, and Emergency Services Division, known as AFAS, stated clearly in their July 16th update that fire hazard is expected to remain high to extreme across northwestern Ontario for the coming days, and that hot, dry, and windy conditions are forecast to persist throughout the region. There was a brief window of slightly better conditions on the overnight of July 15th to 16th. Some cloud cover moved in, relative humidity increased slightly, and winds dropped temporarily. The ministry noted that this produced a temporary slowdown in growth for Fort Frances 14 and 15. But they were equally explicit that fire hazard remains high and that conditions may deteriorate again. A single overnight of reduced growth is not containment. The conditions that built this fire remain in place. Fire activity is also expanding geographically. It is not staying in the Northwest. 5 new fires were discovered in the Northwest region on July the 16th alone, the Nipigon 63 through 66 series and Kenora 18. And 20 new fires were confirmed in the Northeast region on the same day, across the North Bay, Cochrane, Sudbury, Wawa, Timmins, and Chapleau zones. The Northeast region now has 61 active fires with 18 not under control. The emergency is not contained to one part of the province. It is spreading. The restricted fire zone that came into effect on July 15th covers most of northwestern Ontario and parts of the Northeast. No open-air burning of any kind is permitted within that zone. No campfires. All burning permits are suspended. This directive is not bureaucratic caution. It is a recognition that a single human-caused ignition under current conditions in terrain adjacent to one of the hundreds of active fire fronts could initiate something that cannot be stopped. The restrictions exist because the consequences of ignoring them would be measured in communities, not fires. Across all of Canada, the scale of the 2026 wildfire season is already significant. More than 800 fires have burned through 1.9 million hectares of forest, according to NASA Earth Observatory data as of July 14th. Ontario alone has recorded 503 wildland fires year to date within the provincial fire region. The 10-year average for this period is 326. The 2025 count at the same point was 357. The province is significantly above both benchmarks, significantly above average, significantly above even last year's elevated figure, and it is the middle of fire season. The peak of fire danger across the boreal does not arrive in July. It extends through July, August, and into September, with significant fire weather possible throughout that entire window. The question that many people are asking right now, and it is a legitimate question that deserves a direct answer, is whether this level of fire activity in Ontario in July 2026 is connected to broader trends in climate and atmospheric conditions, or whether it is simply an unfortunate coincidence of drought, heat, and wind. The honest scientific answer is that it is both, and the two are not separable. Drought, heat, and wind are the proximate causes of this fire emergency. They are the specific atmospheric ingredients that allowed 100 hectares to become 350,000 hectares in 4 days. But the background conditions that make extreme heat events more likely, that extend drought periods, that push temperature records into territory not seen since 1936, are part of a documented shift in the atmospheric baseline across the boreal and subboreal regions of Canada. The connection between warmer average temperatures, more frequent and severe heat events, reduced snowpack leading to drier summer soils, and increased wildfire activity across Canada is not speculative. It is in the peer-reviewed scientific literature, in the observed fire records spanning decades, and in the operational experience of the firefighting agencies that have been tracking this trend in their own data. What is happening in northwestern Ontario right now does not require any exotic explanation. It requires understanding 3 things that are verifiably true about the conditions on the ground. The fuel is drier than it should be because of prolonged drought. The temperatures are higher than they have been in 90 years. And the fires, once started, are finding no resistance from an atmosphere or a landscape that would normally provide some. The result is what you're seeing in the numbers. 350,000 hectares. 80 fires not under control. 1 community largely destroyed. 15 communities evacuated. The smoke visible from Toronto and detectable across New York State. Here is what is within your control right now, depending on where you are. If you are in any area under an active evacuation alert in northwestern Ontario, your single most important task is preparation. Not waiting to see if it escalates. Preparing now. Medications in quantities sufficient for at least a week. Identification documents, passports, health cards, important financial records, all gathered in one place that you can grab in minutes. A change of clothes, phone charged. Emergency contacts written down on paper, not just stored digitally, because power outages and network failures happen in exactly these situations. Know your route out. Know your destination. Have a backup destination. Do not wait for the official order to be convinced that preparation matters. The order means leave. The preparation is what you do before the order. If you are in a community under smoke advisories, whether in Ontario, Quebec, or the northeastern United States, take the air quality warnings seriously as a health directive, not as an atmospheric inconvenience. On orange level days, avoid prolonged outdoor exertion. Keep windows and doors closed during peak smoke periods. If you have a HEPA air filter, run it. Wear a well-fitted N95 mask if you must be outside for extended periods. Children, thus elderly, pregnant women, and people with any respiratory or cardiovascular condition are at elevated risk and should be treated as such by everyone around them. The particulate levels that turned Toronto's sky yellow on July 15th were not aesthetically unpleasant. They were medically significant. If you are anywhere in Ontario's cottage country or recreational forest areas, the fire restriction that came into effect on July 15th is absolute. No campfires, no open burning of any kind. No burning permits are valid. This is not a guideline. It is a legal restriction with serious enforcement consequences. More importantly, it is a restriction that exists because the landscape around you right now is, in multiple documented locations, already on fire. A campfire in those conditions is not a campfire. It is a potential ignition in a landscape that needs nothing more to produce the next Thunder Bay 36. Collins, First Nation, is gone. That sentence should be allowed to sit without softening. The community has been largely burned. There are no fatalities, and that is a testament to the people who organized the evacuation and the people who responded to it. But the community is gone. The homes that families lived in, the buildings that housed their community life, the structures that represented decades of building something together on their traditional territory, those are gone. What the people of Collins First Nation need right now, in the immediate term, is shelter, food, medical access, and connection to the emergency support systems of the province and the country. In the medium and longer term, they need the sustained commitment of provincial and federal governments to make rebuilding not just possible, but resourced in the way that reflects the severity of what has been lost. The Chiefs of Ontario's formal call for immediate coordinated emergency support is not an administrative request. It is an urgent communication about what is needed right now from the institutions that have the resources and the legal responsibilities to respond. The northern boreal forest of Ontario has been burning in cycles for longer than any human record extends. Fire is part of what this ecosystem is. The forest that burned in 1936 and 1948 in the fire seasons of the 1970s and 1990s and 2000s has come back. The boreal is resilient in ways that are genuinely remarkable. But the resilience of the ecosystem is not the same thing as the resilience of a community that has been destroyed, or the resilience of transportation infrastructure that has been cut, or the resilience of an air quality situation that is making millions of people sick hundreds of kilometers from the fire front. The forest will come back. The human cost of this fire season is what we have the ability to influence right now through the evacuation orders, through the firefighting resources, through the emergency support to displaced communities, through the fire restrictions that prevent additional ignitions, and through the actions of every individual who is in or near these areas and who takes the warning seriously. I will be updating this coverage daily as conditions evolve. The situation is moving fast, and the forecast suggests it will continue to move fast for the coming days. Check Ontario. See fire updates for the most current evacuation orders, road closures, and fire status information. That is the official source, and it is updated in real time by the people managing this emergency. Subscribe right now if you are not subscribed. Turn notifications on. This is exactly the type of developing situation where the update that comes in 12 hours may be more important than everything you have read so far. If you found this coverage useful, please share it with anyone you know in the affected regions or who has family or friends in northwestern Ontario. And leave that comment. Where are you watching from? What are you experiencing? Every piece of the human picture helps the people who are still trying to understand the full scale of what is happening right now across the boreal forest of northern Ontario. Stay safe.